Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is a guest I am super excited to have here on the show. I have been dying to have this guest on for quite some time, and I'm so excited to have her here. Now, my guest today is a proud lesbian Chicana writer and director from East LA. And fueled by her passions for equality, my guest expanded her creative vision into the comic book world, founding Phoenix Studios. Their flagship series, A la Brava, features the first Latina superhero team in comic book history, while Princess Academia showcases incredible Native and Latina princesses. And these comics aren't just stories, but celebrations of culture and identity. And if you've been following me on my YouTube channel, you know that I have showcased almost the entire series of the Ala Brava cast. In fact, I take that back. I think I've showcased all the major players of the Ala Brava team from Jalisco, Santa, Loquita, Ruca, Bandita, a la Brava, which is what I like to call the Avengers Endgame, where all the heroes come together. And of course, the newest one, Los Caballeros. And I had a blast reading and reviewing them here on the channel for you all. So, without further ado, I am proud to introduce to you all a person who needs no more introduction, whose creativity explodes and who's been making huge strides in her community. So, without further ado, allow me to introduce to you all Miss Kayden Pheonix. Kayden, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that intro as well. It was really great. I really liked it.
No problem, Kayden, no problem. Now, as I said, viewers and listeners, I've been dying to have Miss Kayden Pheonix on the show because she is just an amazing creator. Her and her team have been hard at work creating new and incredible content. It's just so, it's just, I could talk for hours, but I'm going to turn over to my guest to make some little introduction. So, Kayden, is there anything else you'd like to share about yourself that wasn't touched in the introduction for our viewers and listeners?
It was very thorough, so you did an amazing job. But I can add a little bit more. I have another book series with my co-writer, my partner in an under another publishing banner under Artillery Network, and so those are a little bit more mature and adult because they're more violent and bloody, very Tarantino-esque in that way. But there's one series called Pimp Killer and another one called 357 Magnum Opus, which is a bounty hunter series. And then there's a one-shot called Pagan Valley. But again, these are older audiences. Like if you're over 18, it's fine. But we just say older audiences because the other two are much more kid-friendly, teen friendly, college friendly, etc.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure to include those at the end of this video, viewers, so that you can go and check them out. So, Kaden, before we dive into the A la Brava series and, of course, Los Hermanos and also Princess Academia, let's start a little bit about you. So, how did this creative spark emerge in your life? Like, what sort of pushed you to go down the road of a writer and a director?
I just really wanted a creative outlet. I went to college, I did marketing. It was totally fine. I like marketing. I did marketing after college. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. I really much enjoyed it, but I had no creative outlet. And so I chose screenwriting as opposed to novel writing as my creative outlet. Screenwriting because I grew up in LA. Not that I know anybody in film industry, but I grew up in LA, so just saw tons of movies growing up. And novel writing was just very dense to me because, as you can see, I watch movies and probably watch them read books, unfortunately. So I leaned that way. I taught myself how to write a screenplay. You get all the books, you practice, and that's pretty much how it started. I started writing features. Not that they were being or seen or anything, but I was just like, no one's seen my work, so let me direct a short film because I can afford to direct a short film, and that's how I got into directing as well. And then from there, I just pivoted into comics because of the Latino superhero aspect that like everyone was kept telling me it should be a comic book. And so I was like, okay, cool. And so I pivoted and started making the graphic novels.
Nice. Very, very nice. So, what would you consider your aha moment, the real deciding moment where you wanted to take your passion and grow a brand with it and create Phoenix Studios? How did that all come about?
I guess when I was thinking, okay, what movie do I want to see on the big screen? That was my first major thing, because it's like, okay, I can write anything, no one's paying me, right? And so I'm working for
Mhm.
free, but it's called a SPAC. And so my first thought of like, what do I want to see on the big screen is a Latino superhero. And I still want to see Latino superhero. It doesn't need to be mine. It can be a million Latino superheroes. I just want to see it on the big screen. And so I was like, okay, great. I can write a Latino superhero. From there, I was literally like, okay, if I increase my chances, if I make 5 of them, I increase my chances. So maybe one of those 5 will become a movie. And then I was like, okay, if I have 5, that's a team. If you're in a team, you're in a universe. And it just kind of went from there. Like it was a really simple thought process in my mind really quickly and it all made sense to me. And so that's how I started. And then of course, because I'm publishing, I just gave myself the Phoenix Studios label, which was my production company label as well.
Nice. And I have to say, as soon as I read the first book of the Brava series, Jalisco, I was blown away because I'm not gonna lie, the artwork, it kind of allowed me to, well, it made me assume it was going to be a more, very middle grade, children's story, but it is not. It is not. It is very mature. It tackles real world situations which you and your team tackle beautifully, and I absolutely love it. I love the characters. I love how their superhero persona is also tied to their cultural identity respectfully, and honestly, it's just so incredible that no one's ever thought of this before, which of course goes back to what you said earlier. It was like, I want to see that, so might as well do it myself, which I love that gung ho attitude. So now let's fast forward to where you are creating the A la Brava series. So let's start with Jalisco, which is the first in this series. So when you began writing Jalisco with your team, what were the goals you had going forward into this book as the author and one of the writers, but also the promise you're making to your future readers?
My goal, I was actually just the only writer on all of those superheroes, but my goal was to create a good story, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm still a storyteller.
Mhm.
It's backed up, of course, by the art because the artwork is absolutely amazing. I have a great art team, but my goal is to create a good story is number one, and then to test it as a business person on the second part, as a business person to test it to see how it's doing, right? Because it does need to survive so that I can make the next book and
Right.
the next book and whatnot. And so I got really lucky. Ali Comic Con invited me to have a free table for my first book. I literally just, it barely came in time. I had a coloring book because the real book didn't come in time, the graphic novel. So I had to hurry up and make a coloring book here in the States. The other ones were coming from overseas. And so I had a coloring book with just one big table and like it did so well. I was so surprised and I was very fortunate. I got covered by a couple of stations as well, which was a nice little surprise for being not the first Latino superhero, but a Latino superhero fighting against the femicide, a Mexican superhero.
Hmm.
And so little things, which all added up. And then you just see the little girls' faces because I had a little Barbie doll. It was really Elena de Avalor Barbie doll, but my friend created the dress. She did a custom Folklorico dress, a Jalisco dress. So I put on the doll. And that was in the center of the table. And so many little girls came up and like they absolutely loved it. And so it's those little things that, keep inspiring you and like, okay, I have to keep going. I had a couple meetings as well from production companies and an agency. And then right from there, we hit the pandemic. And so it's just like, dang. But it's also in that sense, it was great because I can hurry up and make the rest of them because I was so far behind, which I wasn't far behind, but I was so far behind like the pandemic, because we have to say it positively, let me create the rest of them in the time span. And so I started doubling up the work. I started doing 2 novels at the same time. And then eventually with the Princess Academia going, I had 5 books going at the same time. So I had a lot of artists at that time. Some doubled up on the works as well. So that's how I got everything out from 2020 to 2024, I believe.
Wow, that is incredible. And you actually touched on something that will be, covered later in the interview, which is, the pandemic and how it affected, authors, writers, and anyone in the creative outlet. But before we get to that, let's actually talk a little bit more about the Ala Brava series. So after the first book, Jalisco, and then you began expanding with the rest of the team, ultimately, what was the reaction like from friends and family who learned that you were creating this series? Was the feedback overwhelmingly positive, very critical, or somewhere down the middle?
It was positive. I have a lot of great support. I'm very, very fortunate that I've always had a lot of support. And also, the community understands the need for it, right? It literally could have been
Mm,
anybody, and that's totally fine. But like, we need a Latina superhero. We need a Latina team. We need a Mexican superhero. We need a Puerto Rican superhero. We need a Tejana superhero, a Chicana superhero, right? We need that representation as well as saying we exist, right? Because it's more of a we're invisible, right? And when we're not invisible, we're the bad people, we're the villains. And
mm,
so it's pretty much a statement as like also it has social justice issues, which is extremely important as well. But as a Latina on the Latino stance, it's like, where's our representation? Where's our equality? And that's something that's like in all my books and also all my writings of all the stuff that I do as well in film. It's just an equality issue of why don't we get seen as a superhero? Why don't we get seen as a princess? Why don't we get seen as a mentor? Why don't we get seen as a villain? Which we are. But like, to be fair, I made us villains as well. But like, why aren't we seen as everything that a white person can be seen as? And it's just because it's racism and sexism and all these other and different types of oppression, classism. So no, the answer was yes. I had a lot of support.
but you actually are very, very right, Katie, in the sense that, we are in like an age where you would think like we would see like all types of people as, represented in all the aspects of like media. I actually had a previous guest a year ago, Peter Daniels, of his own comics company, and he was almost the very same thing as you said, Kim, that they want to have representation. They want to showcase a lot of the stories for the Black community, but also for stories in Africa, and represent characters from the different states and countries from the continent of Africa, which I had a chance to read some of them. I was blown away, and I got that same feeling from the Ala Brava series. It's like there are so many stories here. It's like, why hasn't this been brought up? Like, why hasn't there been more stories about this? I mean, there's a market right there. There's, so many powerful aspects of the Latino community, Latina community, Hispanic community, everybody who has roots, Spanish roots, indigenous roots. There are stories that needs to be told, but unfortunately, the business I would say like, well, no one's going to read those stories. But then again, we would have to counter that saying, well, who are we to say that no one's going to read them? There is going to be someone who's going to want to read this, which then kind of leads into another major question. But before we get to that, let's actually talk a little bit more about the success of the Ala Brava series. So once you finally got the main lineup of the characters, Luquita, Santa, Jalisco, Ruca, Bandita, and created the Ala Brava team up comic. Did you feel, looking back on it, before you also began with the Princess Academia and the other books, did you feel that the response you got from friends and family validated your goals both personally as well as professionally?
I think so. I mean, my goal honestly was to see it on the big screen, but on the bigger picture, so that part has yet to happen, but I'm working on it. It is a long process, but on the bigger picture, yes, of course. It does need, we obviously, like I said, we need representation in every facet of media, but I don't have the range, unfortunately. So my books are coming out with Andrews McMeel, which they do have the range, which is really nice. So I got licensed my La Brava series. So that comes out actually in June, the first book. and that's Jalisco and Santa put together in volume one. So it's going, right? I am being validated by society. I don't necessarily think I need to be validated by society. Like that's not what I exist for, but it does help, and it does help and support the cause of what I want, which is for these stories to be seen, for Latinas to be seen as equal, like for social injustices of femicide and ICE and all the injustices that we get as females and as Latinas as well.
Absolutely. And this kind of leads into a very powerful, reflective question, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Kayden, which is whenever we create like something that's very passionate, whether it's like a music, a story, or something that's very creative, we imprint a little bit of ourselves into the project. And when we want to share it with everybody, it's very, very unnerving because we don't know how it's going to be received, and that anxiety is heightened. And I think that's very true for writers, for screenplay writers, and for authors, because this is our baby. Like, these projects are our children. We put a lot of time and effort into these things, and it's also a team effort too, because everybody contributed to these creative works. And especially now in the digital age, it is a huge thing for independent creators, but it's also a double-edged sword. Because while we can connect with, a wide range of people, we also unintentionally expose ourselves to hate speech, trolls, spam, negativity, which can impact our mental health and can really deter us from creating anything further. And of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be in the back of everyone's mind, especially the creative mind, telling us no one's going to enjoy this, no one's going to read this, you've wasted your time. So I'm curious, Kayden, at any point in the process of creating the Ala Brava series and the series that came after it, did you have any moments of either heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if not, what had disciplined you to continue going forward? Because no matter what the feedback was like, no matter whatever happened, both in your professional or personal life, you were going to continue this series.
So I'm lucky. I've actually never experienced, what did you call it? Imposter syndrome. I heard the word later on in life, and I was like, okay, what is that? But I'm fortunate in that sense. I like to thank my mom on that part, but I have a lot of confidence. I was raised pretty equal in regards to my brother, in regards to how I saw myself in society. And so I never thought that I was an imposter. I always thought I earned it, which is true. Like, especially as a female, you don't get anywhere unless you absolutely prove it, right? Work twice as hard to make half. That's very much a thing for females, especially Latinas or brown and black people. And so, no, I don't have imposter syndrome. I know if I make it, it's because of me. It's because of my talent. And it's because of my hard work and because of my hustling, and
Mhm.
that's the truth of it. Honestly, I don't know why anyone would think otherwise, but it's because society shows them to treat like that. I think that's how I figured it out. But no, I don't have imposter syndrome. I don't necessarily have anxiety. I think anxiety is part of the process, but it's not anything too extreme or completely stressful. I think just everyone has anxiety just because they stress themselves out, right? Because of their high expectations and their standards. And so I think that's kind of normal, but I think mine is pretty tempered. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but no, I don't have those things. It's really easy for me to keep going forward. I run it all. I'm my own editor. I'm a publisher, right? I'm everything. And so I did what I wanted to do. I didn't have a boss to say no at a white guy, right? I didn't have any of that extra stuff. And so I knew who my audience was. I was aware that my art is very Disney anime inspired, and my words are a little bit harsher in regards to the injustices, right?
Mhm.
The but it's fine because it is very pretty. And why do people pick up the books? Because it's a pretty cover, right? The artist did amazing. They're all very
Mhm.
pretty covers. You notice there's no there's no titles on the cover except for like the lead title, but there's no credits. Like I don't care about me. I don't care about my artist, but like we're on the credit page, so everyone gets their credit. But I don't need to put my name in huge letters on the front page. You're buying it because this is a pretty girl and her name is Latina, and that's fine. That's the purpose. So you go in already wanting to know more, and you just happen to get a really good story that is grounded and hopefully powerful as well.
Absolutely, 100%. I think that honestly, Ken, you probably gave the one of the best answers to this question. So thank you for that. That was really, really powerful. And this kind of now goes back to what you mentioned before about, the pandemic and quarantine and having the time to create and fully flesh out not just the Ala Brava series, but Prince Academia, Los Caballeros, and the other series you are working on with your editor, writer, and your artist, which brings up something which I don't know if you've been made aware of, or maybe your fans have brought this to your attention, but one of my previous guests on the show, Jasmine Young, mentioned this on her social, which is the pandemic. Uh, Terrible, terrible 4 years across the world, but in those 4 years, something beautiful did come about it, which is a golden age of creators, which is musicians, screenwriters, artists, and especially authors. And looking back on that, and also of the people that I've had the opportunity to interview, almost all of them got their start during the pandemic, during quarantine. So I pose this question to you, Kayden. In your opinion, do you believe that the pandemic and the quarantine kind of led the way for a golden age, or let me phrase it, paved the way for a golden age of creators?
I think that's interesting thought. I think it also depends on what field you're looking at. So,
Mm,
as a filmmaker, a lot of independent filmmakers that I know had to go back home because you're not shooting anymore, right? And so,
right.
because it was pandemic, it was lockdown, and then it was
Hmm.
pandemic, etc. And so, a lot of people had to go back home because they couldn't get work, right? Because we survive on gigs, and it is you better get your next job to pay for your rent, over and over and
Hmm.
over again. And so in filmmaking for independent people, I think it was much harder. I didn't shoot anything. I shot something at the very top of the pandemic because it was already in the process. So we had to adapt and move a lot of things. We lost a lot of locations and certain things. So we had to adapt the script to make it work with pandemic and do the best we can, of course.
Hmm.
But I didn't shoot all those 4 years, like at all. And so I understand that aspect of it. Some of the studios, did eventually when they can wear the masks again and whatnot, but everything was on lockdown in regards to filmmaking. Also, because you're not allowed to go out and, have creative in filmmaking land at least, what do you have to do? You have to get a job, which is everyone got remote jobs because that makes
Hmm.
sense. Yeah. But in regards for writers and artists, possibly if they had their job, they kept their job, but that is no difference then. That means they had their job prior. Um, so maybe they decided to stay home more because they couldn't go out and do hobbies and hang out with friends. Then it makes sense. Then I get it. I'm not sure in the golden age. I actually didn't think about it like that. But I think it's nice to have a good perspective on the pandemic and be like,
Hmm.
yes, this is why. I started in late 2019. So it was literally right before the pandemic was when my first book came out, Jalisco. And then, and that was in LA, was Comic Con was in November. And then, it was set for all the rest of them, et cetera. But everything got canceled, et cetera, as we all know the same story. But I was going to go through regardless.
Right.
uh, but no, it's fine. I mean, we have to say the positive at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And it's actually very interesting because when I also got started on the journey as being an author, I was almost the same thing as you. Like I started my first story at the same time around 2019. I was still in graduate school up in Northern California in San Francisco. And then, of course, I had to leave school. Well, not leave, but I had to go back home to Southern California to do remote schooling. I did not like it. I got bored, so I just went to town writing. And within 2 years, I was able to get four drafts of my books done, three of which are published. And I definitely think it was just a way to break the monotonous of, isolation, because unless you were with family or roommates, the average person was pretty much isolated from, the world. I mean, we could connect with people remotely, but we couldn't see, our friends or family physically. And that's a lot of, you know, That's very tough for people to go through, like that isolation for 4 years, not seeing anyone. So I definitely think the creative side definitely grew more in those 4 years than anything previously. And it's a beautiful thing that happened during those 4 years because a lot of people were very, very happy and very positive to like break the monotonous, as I said before. And of course, within those 4 years, a lot of people started their own businesses, which now leads perfectly into the business portion of being an author. So, as a little icebreaker, Kayden, when you began, creating your company and your brand, Phoenix Studios, how much research did you discover to really not only make Phoenix Studios unique, but also very familiar to the average comic reader?
How much research did I do? Like very minimal. I did research in regards to business zero. I come from business. I had a
Mhm.
DBA prior. I had my independent production company as well prior. So I did zero in regards to that part. But in regards to comic book worlds, I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't read a comic book my whole life up to then. And so I started reading comic books. I went to YouTube and I looked at the top 10 comics and I, saw different people's answers. It is subjective, but at the end of the day, there's truth by consensus. And so majority of all the ones that I've watched, their top 10s or the top 20s or whatnot, the answer is Alan Moore, right? So V for Vendetta, Watchmen, the Killing Joke, right? Like those are the ones that are the most hard hitting. So I read those, of course. They're a little vulgar. They're of their time. They're completely sexist. But you're like, okay, what made it effective? Why is it
Mhm.
memorable? Right? Craven, right, was another one I thought was pretty cool. And so it's just like I took what I liked from each of them. Watchmen is a 3x3. So I looked at it in different formats in regards to story, but it's also in regards to a business as a publisher. So 3x3 means 3 panels across and 3 panels down. So there's 9 panels every single page of Watchmen. Like it is universal. It's uniform every
Mhm.
single page. I was like, that's great. I can do that. That's easy. I don't need to draw big boxes and whatnot and splash pages, etc. And so I did mine. Jalisco's are actually 4x4s. So there's 16 panels in every single box and every single page,
Mhm.
excuse me. And they're just squares. There's no rectangles or anything crazy going on yet. This was my first book. So it was very much, okay, let's learn how to make a comic, make a graphic novel. And so I just started doing stuff based off of that. The shots were easy because I come from directing. And so a storyboard is still a storyboard for me. So I did my little sketch figures and I just transferred it over because it's still like, here's a wide shot, here's a 2 shot. I didn't speak like that to my artist, but the
Right.
storyboard crosses over because they understand images. I just drew the text boxes, right? Like that's the new thing I
Mhm.
did draw, but and the little notes on the bottom. But that's kind of what I did before with when I did storyboards with my DP. So in regards for comics, yes, I had to learn the business of making a comic. I didn't do comic book structure, which is when you're writing it out as a writer, a comic book writer, there's a picture here and then there's a line and you put the dialogue on top and I think the action on the bottom. I care more about story and same I come from storyboards. So I drew every single page. It's a very ugly stick figure of all 60 pages of every book for all my books that I've done. And so that works for me, right? That was
Mhm.
I can adapt it enough and then it translates to my artist. And so that's the only thing I did have to learn is what I was going to bring with me and what I had to take in that was new.
Absolutely. And I also got that cinematic feeling from all of your books that it definitely reads like a movie. Like I'm
Yeah.
reading a movie, which honestly, it's just so very fascinating. And I think that's one of the main things I'm very fascinated from screenwriters is how they approach storytelling different from traditional authors. Because, screenwriters have, they have the blurb, they have like a line of dialogue or two, and they just keep going. Like it's very fast paced. Would you say that's another reason, or I should say, is that something that your readers have picked up that while it's in a graphic novel form, it doesn't read or go the same beat as your standard comic book or graphic novel?
I have no idea. No one's told me that. But I think it's fine either way. I hope they enjoy the story. I hope, but no one's told me either way.
Okay, because it reads very, very cinematically, like how you are able to convey, the tension of the scene from like pages that may not have a lot of dialogue, but
Mhm.
I'm able to figure out, okay, this is what's happening, this is what this person's doing, and I'm able to formulate the dialogue that I think they would be saying, which I think, that's a testament to you, Kayden, as a writer, as well as, your editor structuring what's going to happen, as well as the artist conveying those emotions. I mean that is such an incredible feat, which then kind of leads into the next set of questions, which is of course the audience and the readership. So let's start with the audience first, because when we create our own books, we are the target audience first and foremost, because we know the story better than anyone else. But when we share it with other people, we really have to consider, okay, who exactly am I marketing this towards? So when you began writing Jalisco, did you have a good idea of your audience from the beginning? And in your opinion, when should a writer, an author, or even let's say independent filmmaker really understand who their audience is? Before the pre-writing stage or in the post-production stage?
Absolutely, before you write it. I write clean teen. I write that across the board. I'm very, very simple in that way. So clean teen means no sex, no drugs, no drinking. And so all my books, minus the action ones, because those were already established prior to me getting to them, are very clean teen. And so it's really easy because so for same thing with for the princesses, which are the young youth, right?
Right.
Young adults. I'm sorry, well, just youth in general. I just made it where they'd understand it enough. I tried not to use necessarily big words, not that I have some grand vernacular either, but it's just you do absolutely know who your audience is, right? Like princesses, who's gonna read princesses? Obviously, younger kids.
Hmm.
Everyone else, but otherwise, I always write clean tune.
All
So
right.
that's what I really stick to. But I think that's just my voice of how I write in general.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes forward now into the readership, which I definitely think, at least in my opinion, I think it's probably the most difficult one as opposed to the audience, because the audience is a very broad organism, but the readership, the individual people who are going to pick up our stories, that's the most difficult. And I don't know if it's the same thing in comics, maybe a little bit, but in like the standard publishing world, you have, YA, NA, and AF. AF is for adult fiction, and each reading category, each reading group had its own set of rules and expectations that it expects from those who write in those um, reading age groups, because there have been so many books that are marketed to one age group, but upon reading them, it's like, this need to be edited because this is not YA. This is either NA or AF. Same thing with middle grade fantasy. Like it has its own set of rules. So what have you learned about? I know you said before that you write, clean teen fantasy, but did at any point for any of your stories, whether the Ala Brava, Los Hermanos, Prince Academia, or your other ones, that you want to write a standard age group for all of them, but upon realizing that certain books fit better in a certain age category?
No, I have adults reading princesses. They literally do not care, and it's totally fine. It's cute, right? If you know you want something cute, you get the princess one. If you want something a little bit stronger, you get the superheroes. If you want something rough, you get the action ones. But no, I know the genre that I live in, and I think the genre will tell you who your audience is.
Absolutely. And I think that now leads perfectly to probably a question that I am really excited to hear your thoughts on, Kaden, which is, of course, this balancing act for all creators, which is, our individuality and the stories we grew up with. And shout out to Eric Bowden for this, because I definitely think it is a struggle for all creators who want to showcase their voice, because on one end, you want to showcase who you are. You want to have your voice. You want to tell people this is who you are and this is how you approach storytelling. on the other side, you cannot deny that we are always going to be inspired by the works of the past, whether that's film, whether that's TV shows, whether that's other books, and that's going to find its way into our writing in some shape or form, whether it's how we approach characters, how we, establish a story, or if it's a theme or whatever. But there has to be a balance where you're not exactly copying a previous source and just honoring it. So for you, Ken, how have you been able to balance these two scales in your own life as a creator?
I think it just makes you who you are. Like the movies I watched growing up, of course, have influenced me into what I like to watch and what I like to read and what I like to write. And so it makes sense completely. My experiences is, of course, that influences me as to who I am, which there is an outcome of what I'm writing and what becomes an outcome of what I'm writing and such. And so what was the question? How does it influence me? It's just that is the output. It's an amalgamation of both of those things put together. I think
All right.
that's with everybody. I also think, though, as well, that storytelling is a reflection of society.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is going on at these times? Like me, as you can tell, on my one beat is equality. Why? Because we have oppression. So that is throughout all my books. Even in the
Mm-hmm.
princesses, they have to be strategic, but because there's these people, these bad people, going after them, right, to suppress them in different forms and not as harsh as what I just said. But like,
Right.
it really that's the underlying issue on all of them. They do learn courage and very kid themes as well, but that's what it is. Like that is my reflection of my society, of how I'm living in society right now, and so that's something that carries in all my works.
Absolutely. And I definitely feel, as an add-on to that, I'm sure you may have seen, as fellow creator, like comics or books that have a tagline, so and so meets so and so. And from a reader's perspective, that is, enticing because it gets us intrigued. But from a creator standpoint, it may not be really helpful as we originally thought, in the sense that it pigeonholes us into one style of writing or one style of storytelling, and we shouldn't be restricted. We shouldn't be contained in like a little box of like, oh, he's a best fantasy writer or she's a best fiction writer. We should be able to explore other creative avenues and touch on other topics. Yes, we can have our bread and butter, we can have our preferred genres or preferred styles of writing, but we should be allowed to uh, be cross genre, be able to write stories that we want to write. And what are your thoughts on this, Kayden? Because I've had a lot of guests, give differing answers to this question.
I think it's two parts. It's your perspective on it is really the answer. And so, if you are pigeonholed, technically it's a really great thing because they're like, oh, I need a Latina. That's the girl, right?
Mm,
You're the first thought. If I need a horror writer, that's the person, right? Like
mm,
you meet all these other people that are doing the exact same thing that you are. You're the first thought with that one word that you own, which is a great compliment. You think of Tarantino, bloody, that he owns that word, right?
mhm,
And so it's just like think of each word and who owns what word. That's a great thing. They are pigeonholed. Jim Carrey is funny, so of course he wants to do drama, and that makes sense. But like we will always know him as the funny guy. Will Ferrell, same thing. We'll always know him as the funny guy. It's the perspective on it. You are the first thought. If you're the first thought, that means you may probably make the most money out of it as well, right? Because you're the first
mm.
one that everybody wants, everybody goes to. So it's a good thing. If you want to break out and be like, I'm a drama, I'm horror, I'm genre, etc. It's a different. I want to do animation tomorrow. That's fine and dandy if you're just entertaining yourself, but at the end of the day, that's a hobby. And so I think it's perspective. I don't think it's necessarily an insult. If someone says Latino superhero and they think of me, or Latino superheroes plural, they think of me, awesome. Then I did my job right. That means the books are getting out there, they're being seen. It's not an insult at all.
That's a very, very, very influential answer, Kayden. Again, you are two for two in this interview, which I absolutely love. And kind of a follow up to that, before I get to another major reflective question, is I had a previous guest on my show talk about something where, as creators, we should be, you know, experimental. and she said that we should write what we're afraid of. And a lot of guests have, offered their own answers to this question. So for you, Kaden, how do you approach like this question, like writing what you're afraid of? What does that mean to you?
I think that's interesting. I've actually never heard that one. I will try it. I think that's fun. I think that's a really fun approach. For me, what works, I think do what works for you is the answer. For me, what works, if you're passionate about it, you will finish it. You will give it what it needs and you will actually finish it, which is part one, right?
Mhm.
But you will give it its justice because you care about it. So I move more so from fear, like not necessarily from fear, but from anger, which is really great. So like, the numbers came out in 2020 in regards to Latino representation in film. Out of 1,300 films that came out, how many was a Latino director? The answer was one, and that was Patricia Reagan for Sony. But it's just like I had to beat 1,299 people to get hired as a director for a feature.
Right.
That sounds impossible. Plus, it's honest, it's just that it's the world is not set up for me. And
Mm.
so what I did, I created Chicana Directors Initiative, which is a nonprofit for Latino directors. And there's little things just like, okay, I will move if I'm mad. So that's what I
Mm.
start realizing, right? Reading all about all these social injustices, femicide gets me mad. All these horrible things and abuses towards females. They get me mad. Like they're very get sad, but like they get me mad. And so of course I can write about it. I don't like researching it. I have to do it as diligence.
Mhm.
But it will make sure I get the authentic story. It's not necessarily my story, it's not personal to me, but it does affect me, it does hurt me. And so because of that, I can write it as a story that's a digestible story under the guise of a superhero. And so that's what works for me,
Mm.
right? So the quote that I learned is whatever pulls your heartstrings, that's what your life is about. So
Mm.
if you care about it, you're going to do it. If you care about immigration, you care about whatever, write about it. You will absolutely do it justice and it'll be something great. And so that works for me. I don't know about the fear one. I will try it. I don't necessarily have much fear, but I will try it regardless. And I'll let you know on that one. I think it's fun. I think if it works, cool.
Nice. Very, very nice. And I have to say, everything you talked about again is a reason why I love your series, A la Brava, because you are able to incorporate real world situations so beautifully into your stories where it feels natural. Because I know for comics as well as for anything creative, when it ties in real world situations, it could be a hit or miss. And there have been some great stories that tackle real world issues. There are those that are not as successful and they fall flat. But yours, I will praise to the heavens that you touch on so many incredible, powerful, and real urgent discussions that are very thought provoking, and that just showcases your skill as a writer, as a storyteller, and it's absolutely just beautiful and powerful, which leads to a very, very powerful reflective question, Kaden. So brace yourself. This is a very, very long one. So, as context to this question, I've been doing this show now for about 7 years, and I've interviewed thank you, within 7 years, I've interviewed about 123 authors from all backgrounds: comic writers, screenplay writers, first time indie authors, established authors, hybrid authors, etc. And I've learned a lot from them. And from these interviews, I've learned that there, at least in my opinion, two roads for writers and authors, which is to be an author and to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the story, the other is dedicated to marketing and building one's brand. Now, both lead to the end goal, which is, status, world renowned, award winning, etc. But the hard truth in this industry, whether it's, the publishing industry or the comic book industry or even the film industry, there is no guarantee your debut anything is going to be an overnight success, because in all three of these industries it's not a get rich quick money scheme. Would we all like it to be? Absolutely. You would have so many people leaving their jobs and increasing the creative outlets. But unfortunately, that is not the case. There are exceptions to the rule, of course. There have been a lot of creators whose first works did launch them with award winning status, and that is not an easy thing to do. So, all the power to them. But generally speaking, you have these highs and low moments for creators. And for some, I've talked with a lot who have had their passion destroyed because they try to make this their full career. And it goes to this mentality of, are you entering this creative outlet as a passion project, or are you trying to build something off of it, that commercial mindset? Because that's another thing to really look into. So, Kayan, I turn over to you to hear your thoughts on this, discussion that while it is true that there is no guarantee your first anything is going to be the start of your legacy, it shouldn't deter somebody if they want to be a screenplay writer, comic writer, author, or film director if they're truly passionate about this industry and understanding what their goals truly are.
Correct. What is your question though? At all of that?
So I guess my question is like, what are your thoughts on like this topic that there is no guarantee, but even if there's no guarantee you're going to get anything out of it, that shouldn't stop you. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree. I think at the very beginning, before you do anything, you should know what your goal is. If your goal is to get your story out, awesome. Good job. You can do that. Just put it on, any on an online site. It's fine. You can do that. If you're happy with that, great. If your goal is to get into a movie or a TV series, whether it's animated or live action, great. Go after that. That means you're on the business side, you're on the hustling side. That's where I'm at. But
Mhm.
that was my goal going in. That is what I wanted, and that's what I'm still going for. I'm not done yet. But same thing, it depends what you want. If you want a publisher to buy it and to take all the rights for it, cool, let them publish it. You don't have to do the independent self-publishing route like I did, right? Like you have to figure out what your goals are, what works for you. And the answer is great, go do that. That's how I am with everything. Like if those that do want, those that want to. So if you really wanted something, you would do everything you can to attain it. And so that's how I see life. I know what I want out of the comics, out of my IP that I established. I just established through comics as opposed to film or anything else. And it's going. It's very slow route. It absolutely is a slow route, but you gotta go through the mud and you'll eventually get there. And so that's what works for me. That's my mindset on it. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. And also to add on to that, grit transforms into talent. And I've also learned as, an author that my first book, which was The Gathering, was not going to be like the start. But the other books that came after it, people have really enjoyed those. And it's okay because as I learned from a previous author whose seventh book was like the one that she's most known for, she always tells people that it's okay if your first book's not the success, not the money maker, because when you do write that book, whether it's your 15th, your 20th, or your 30th, you can tell your fans, if you enjoyed this book, you should see my other one to see my growth. And that is, perfectly fine because you only get better as time goes on. And also, I think, which is really, really imperative in the indie circle, is networking because, oh my goodness, networking is a lifesaver for us independent creators with like, finding, other people, like-minded individuals who tell the same stories, or they have other methods to help with the business side because I struggle with the business side. I'm still trying to understand that. And it's just it's a beautiful community, the in the community. And I'm sure you definitely have a lot of people who have helped you grow Phoenix Studios into what it is now. So, Kayden, are there any people you like to take this moment to take a personal shout out to who have helped you along the way, whether it's like, your editors, writers, or maybe a family friend who connected you with somebody? Anyone you would like to give a personal shout out to?
Well, Giselle Omar, of course, she's my writing partner, my co-creator as well on the Artillery Network banner. And so all those ideas have come from her to establish it. And so it's really cool to be a part of it. So I'm a co-writer on a lot of those. And so that's a cool, different venture that is completely different, right? Because I'm very used to just doing everything on my own, etc.
Mm.
And so I appreciate that and everything that she brings to the table as well.
Nice, very, very nice. And before we get to the final questions, I did have a fun question, which I always like to ask my guests every now and then. And this is the fun question. So, if you had to, let's say, adapt one of your books from any of your series into a novel to fully flesh out the characters, what book would that be? And also, as an add on, is there another type of story that you would want to explore that's outside of your comfort zone?
The first question shows is the answer is that my characters are not fleshed out, but I will answer it anyway because I come from Secret Night, and so I'd like to think that my characters are as most fleshed out as they could be.
Mm.
But I would say a la Brava because a la Brava encompasses all of the characters, and so it doesn't hurt. I think that one's way more fun. What type of style is? I'm sorry. What type of style was the that?
The second one is so what's another, I'd say, let me phrase it, what's another story topic that you would like to explore that's outside of what you're comfortable writing?
So the one that I was thinking about a lot is elder abuse. And it's not that I'm uncomfortable. I just really don't want to research it. Like it's such a
Mm.
so sad to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that is the reason why. But I think it's a highly important topic. I mean, I just don't want to deal with it. That's all.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess another interesting question to this: if you had to take one of your characters from any of your series and pair them off with another character from like an from another established comic, who would that be and why?
That's really fun. I would, I actually got something similar to that. So I would say the Joker. I think the Joker is such a
Ooh.
fun character. And I would put Joker up against Jalisco. I don't know if that's necessarily fair, but that's what I would do because Jalisco is very innocent in a way, and she learns her strength as she continues through the story. And obviously, she has Blade. She doesn't have a real power, but nor does Joker, right? Joker just has power, and she comes, and Jalisco comes from nothing, so she has no power, in regards
Mhm.
to stats and clout. So I think
Right.
that would be kind of fun because they are completely opposite, of course, in their morals. And so I think that would be fun. I don't know how long it would live that series, but I could put those two.
Oh, okay, that I would pay money to see that. I would also pay Ruka to take on the Joker because I definitely think, in my opinion, Ruka's probably, one of like the major powerhouses of the Alabama cast. I don't know why. I just love Ruka as a character. She's just so, I have no words to describe her because all of the characters are so powerful in their own way. They're so funny, they're so witty, they're so lovable. But Ruka, I don't know what it is, but Ruka just feels like the mom of the group, like the one that just kind of rallies everyone together or just like says, okay, everybody, just calm down, calm down. We're not trying to kill each other. And I would also love to see down the road potentially the Ala Brava cast meet the Los Caballeros. I think that would be a very, very fun, story, just seeing how they would all come together. And I think, talking about this, it just brings a smile to my face because it's just so amazing, like how these stories are able to talk about something that's very personal, but also give inspiration to it, which I think at the end goal, it's doing that. It's, telling a good story, it's bringing people together, it's unifying a community, which is beautiful. It is a very, very beautiful thing. So we now come to the last question of this amazing interview, Keaton. So here it is. With everything you've learned thus far, as a writer, as a director, as a screenplay writer, as a business owner, what is your word of wisdom to fellow independent creators who want to create something of their own, whether that's a film, whether that's a story, or their own business, their brand? What is your word of wisdom to them?
Do it for yourself. I think that's helped me a lot. That's kind of why I was doing it all. Like, obviously, there's a bigger purpose that is much more important. But at the end of the day, if you care, it kind of ripples and everybody also cares. And so do it for yourself. Find your why as to why you want to do it, and then do it because those odds are is very powerful. And same thing, other people also think along the same lines as you are. So they will attach and they will support. And so you will have your community instantly. They will come to you.
Beautifully said, Kayden. Beautifully said. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing, incredible author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Ms. Kayden Pheonix for making her official debut here on the channel. It has been a pleasure to have her on, and I wish her the very best with her team, with her company, and everything for 2025 and for 2026 and the future. Now, Kayden, where can people find you on social media as well as purchase copies of your books, the A la Brava, Los Caballeros, Princess Academia, and others? And do you have any special projects you would like to announce? Any works in progress you would like to share?
Okay, so my social medias, our Instagram is at Latina Superheroes, TikTok also Latina Superheroes, and then my Blue Sky is my name, Kayden Pheonix. Next, if you want to look at the books on my shop is latinasuperheroes.com, and that is where the princesses, the superheroes, and Los Caballeros, which is the Latino superhero team. The other store is artillerynetwork.com, and that is for the action ones, which you didn't really get to. And then your last question, I was listening, I was just like, I gotta remember so many things. The what I'm working on is that I have a pre-order actually coming up. Actually, it's already on pre-order for Andrews McMeel. Those are the combined copies. So Jalisco Santa comes out in one book. It is on pre-order. It's available on Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, every bookstore. It's also on my website at latinasuperheroes.com, but it releases June 10th. If anybody wants to get a newer copy, it comes in paperback and hardcover, which is really cool because I haven't had hardcover yet. And that's about it.
Awesome. And are you going to be making any appearances at any conventions this year?
Yes, so I have WonderCon coming up in the end of March, March 28th through 30th over in Anaheim. And then I have possibly Phoenix Fan Fusion in June. I'm just dependent on schedule. And then I'm in London for MCM London, which is May, the end of May, Memorial Day weekend.
Awesome. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you everyone for joining us for another amazing, incredible author interview. And thank you again to Kayden for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having her on, and I wish her the very best. And hopefully, this won't be the last time she's on the show. Maybe she will come back, talk about another project, or maybe her other series, which she mentioned just now. And if you want to stay up to date with all of her social media, make sure to follow her on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And also make sure to check out my book impressions video, or should I say comic impressions video, where I review all of the A la Brava cast as well as Los Caballeros. And bonus, comment who's your favorite Ali A la Brava team. Until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day.